All right, let's talk about something that's absolutely critical for our total well-being: mind, body, and purpose. We're diving deep into an issue that's kind of been growing in the background, but is now shaping an entire generation: the huge mental health crisis facing Gen Z. This isn't just about having a bad day. It's a real challenge to living a strong, resilient, and meaningful life. So let's break down what's really going on here.
Let's just start with the number that should honestly stop you in your tracks: 42%. That's the percentage of Gen Z that's been diagnosed with a mental health condition. We're talking about nearly half of an entire generation. That single statistic really just sets the stage for how urgent this conversation is.
And you know, this isn't happening in a bubble. This slide right here really paints a picture of a massive generational divide. Look at this. When you ask people about feeling nervous or anxious, 61% of Gen Z says they feel this way often. That is more than double the rate of baby boomers. This isn't some small trend. It's a fundamental shift in how a generation is experiencing the world.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at just how big this problem is. Then we'll get into three huge factors: the digital world, what's being called a culture of rumination, and this deep search for meaning. And don't worry, we'll end by looking at a real path forward to building healthier, stronger lives.
Okay, first up, let's just lay out the evidence. To really get a handle on this crisis, we need to understand its depth and what this distress actually looks and feels like for young people today.
The reality on the ground is, well, it's pretty stark. 70% of teens say anxiety and depression are major problems among their friends. And that last number, 18%, nearly 1 in 5 young people having regular thoughts of self-harm, I mean, that's just a heartbreaking statistic that demands our full attention.
So, the big question is, what's driving all of this? One of the biggest things the source material points to is the massive impact of our digital lives. It's everywhere.
9 hours. That's how much time the average member of Gen Z spends on a screen every single day. Think about that for a second. That's more time than they're spending asleep. It has completely rewired what daily life even looks like.
And this slide does a fantastic job of showing why those 9 hours are such a big deal. It's basically about brain chemistry. Our brains react completely differently to being online versus hanging out with people in person. Online life gives you these quick, easy dopamine hits from likes and notifications, which creates this endless cycle of comparison and needing validation from strangers. Real, in-person connection, on the other hand, things like actually making eye contact and sharing an experience, that releases stuff like oxytocin, which helps build the deep, supportive relationships we all need to be mentally resilient.
Now, it's not just about our phones. There's another huge factor at play here, and it's the way our culture actually talks about mental health. The source really explores how this conversation has shifted, and maybe, just maybe, some of our modern approaches are having consequences we didn't intend.
Look, nobody's saying we shouldn't talk about mental health. Reducing stigma is obviously a good thing. But the source asks a tough question. Have we tipped over into romanticizing mental illness? You see slogans like "Live, Laugh, Lexapro" on t-shirts and coffee mugs, and it starts to feel trendy, almost like an identity you can just put on, instead of a real challenge to work through. It's a kind of normalization that can really blur the lines.
And this brings us to this incredibly powerful idea called rumination. It's defined here as a pathological obsessing over your pain. It's the difference between saying, "Okay, I have a problem," and getting stuck in a mental loop, just replaying it over and over and over again without actually moving towards a solution.
The key difference here is between these two mindsets. One is problem-focused, which can trap you in a victim state where you're just dwelling on the suffering. The other is solution-focused. That's where you start asking why. You take action, and you find a sense of purpose by contributing to something that's bigger than you are. It's the difference between being defined by your problems and being empowered by your ability to solve them.
That idea, contributing to something larger than yourself, leads us straight into our next section: the search for meaning. The source argues that as some of the traditional pillars of our society have kind of faded away, it's created this void, leaving a lot of people feeling adrift without a clear sense of purpose.
I mean, just look at this chart. It tells a huge story about a massive cultural shift. Nearly 30% of baby boomers go to weekly religious services. For Gen Z, that number plummets to just 13%. For centuries, these institutions provided community, structure, a sense of higher purpose, and their decline is a really big deal for our social fabric.
So where is that human need for meaning going? The source suggests that as religious engagement has gone down,
Social and political activism has really risen up to fill that space. A staggering 70% of Gen Z say they are involved in some kind of cause. They're looking for that purpose and sense of belonging in movements for social change. Now, the source presents this data from a study, and it's looking at self-reported life satisfaction. It found that conservative women report being completely satisfied with their lives at more than double the rate of liberal women. The source is careful to say this isn't just about politics, but argues these numbers are linked to other factors, like higher rates of religious belief and marriage, which, statistically, are often connected to a greater sense of well-being. Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem from a few different angles, but the good news is we're not just going to leave it there. The source material offers a really clear, practical path toward rebuilding that mental strength and getting back to a state of total well-being. Here are 4 concrete, actionable steps. Number 1, digital fasting. Basically, consciously taking a break from your screens to reset. Number 2, get outside and move your body. We all know how proven that is for mental health. 3, go out and intentionally find a real in-person community. And number 4, actively chase a higher purpose, whether that's through faith or service or whatever cause is bigger than yourself. And the philosophy that connects all of these steps is really simple. It's a fundamental shift in focus, a shift outward. It's about moving away from being obsessed with yourself and towards service, from needing likes online to having real human connection, and from this dwelling on your problems to taking responsibility for your life. It's about finding strength not by looking deeper inside, but by connecting with something bigger. And this quote from the source really just boils the whole argument down perfectly. It takes this big, complex issue and narrows it to 2 main drivers: the overwhelming amount of time we spend on social media and the shrinking role of faith, or a connection to something divine, in modern life.
So we've seen how our digital lives, this culture of rumination, and a search for meaning are all shaping Gen Z's mental health. The path forward, as this material suggests, is about reconnecting with the real world, finding purpose, and shifting our focus outward. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. In a world that is just saturated with digital noise, where will you find the real, lasting meaning that's the true foundation of well-being?